I'm Bridget Whitney, 32 years old. 3 years ago, my parents took their entire $500,000 retirement fund and handed it to my sister for her startup. They sat me down at the dinner table, not to ask my opinion as a senior accountant at a Fortune 500 firm, but to take notes and learn from her. When I pointed out the red flags in her financial projections, my mother cut me off. "Don't be jealous, Bridget. You just don't understand business." 3 years later, at Thanksgiving dinner in front of 30 guests, FBI agents walked through our front door with handcuffs. And the first words my sister screamed as they arrested her? "This was Dad's idea." Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story resonates with you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. This story begins with a simple truth. I learned too young. In my family, some daughters are born to shine, and some are born to applaud. Growing up in the Whitney household, there were two kinds of daughters. There was Meredith, beautiful, magnetic, the girl who walked into a room and made it revolve around her. And then there was me. I was the quiet one, the one who read books in corners while Meredith performed impromptu concerts for relatives, the one who got straight A's while everyone asked Meredith about her latest audition. I didn't resent her for it, not then. I just assumed this was how families worked. Some people were stars, and some people were audience members. The first time I truly understood my place was at my high school graduation. I was valedictorian. I'd worked 4 years for that honor, staying up past midnight, turning down parties, pushing myself until my eyes burned. When they called my name to give the speech, I looked out at the crowd. My parents' seats were empty. They arrived 20 minutes late, sliding into the back row just as I finished. Mom's excuse? Meredith had a callback for a commercial. We couldn't just leave her there alone. Meredith was 21. She had a driver's license. "You understand, right, honey?" Mom said afterward, straightening my graduation cap like that made up for missing the whole thing. "You're so independent. You don't need us cheering for you. Meredith is different. She's sensitive." I nodded. I smiled. I told myself that being independent was a compliment. It took me 15 years to realize that independent was just the word my parents used for the daughter they didn't prioritize. Meredith wasn't more sensitive. She was simply more seen, and in my family, being seen was everything. But back then, I didn't have the words for it. I just had a hollow feeling in my chest and a valedictorian medal that no one in my family ever asked to see. Fast forward 12 years, I'd built something I was genuinely proud of. Senior accountant at Morrison & Hartley, one of the most respected financial firms in Chicago. 6-figure salary. I'd worked on cases with the SEC, helped uncover fraud schemes that made the Wall Street Journal. My colleagues respected me. My bosses trusted me with their most complex audits. None of that mattered at Sunday dinner. "So, Bridget," my father said, cutting into his steak, "still doing the number thing?" "I'm a forensic accountant, Dad. I analyze financial statements, detect fraud, work with federal investigators." Right. He waved his fork dismissively. "Lots of typing." Meredith laughed from across the table. At 35, she was between jobs again. Consulting, she called it, which meant unemployed with a better vocabulary. But the way my parents looked at her, you'd think she was waiting for her Nobel Prize. "Meredith's exploring some incredible opportunities," Mom announced, refilling my sister's wine glass. "She has such vision. Not everyone can see the big picture like she does." "Bridget's good at the small picture," Dad added. "Details, that's valuable too. Someone has to do the behind-the-scenes work." I set my fork down. "I testified in a federal fraud case last month. The defendant is facing 15 years. Silence. Then Mom, "That's nice, honey. But it's still working for someone else, isn't it? Meredith's going to build something of her own someday. She has the entrepreneurial spirit." I looked at my sister, who smiled at me with something that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite triumph. She'd always been fluent in that particular expression. The skill they dismissed, my ability to see what didn't add up, would eventually reveal everything. But they weren't ready for that conversation yet. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 6 months after that dinner. "Family meeting tomorrow night," Mom said. "Meredith has something important to share. Be there at 7. Dress nicely." I almost asked why dressing nicely mattered for a family dinner, but I'd learned that questions only prolong these conversations. The next night, I walked into my parents' house to find the dining room transformed. Meredith had set up a projector and laptop. A screen displayed her company logo, Nova Tech Solutions, in sleek silver letters. "Sit, sit!" Mom ushered me to a chair. "This is so exciting." Dad was already seated, practically vibrating with anticipation. I'd never seen him this engaged in anything I'd ever done. Meredith launched into her pitch. AI-powered data management for small businesses, revolutionary technology, disrupting the industry. She used every buzzword in the startup playbook. I listened, I watched the slides, and my stomach began to sink. "Our projected first-year revenue is $2 million, Meredith announced proudly. $2 million, with no existing client base, no proven product, no technical co-founder. And I'm thrilled to announce," she continued, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion, "that Mom and Dad have agreed to be my first major investors." Mom grabbed Dad's hand. "We're putting in $500,000. The room tilted. "That's," I started, then stopped. "That's your entire retirement savings." "An investment in family," Dad corrected. "Meredith's going to make us all rich." Meredith beamed. "I've already secured interest from angel investors. This is just the beginning." I stared at the projector screen, at numbers that didn't make sense from any angle I could calculate. And I made a choice that would define the next 3 years of my life. I opened my mouth to speak. "Meredith," I said carefully, "your revenue projections, what are they based on?" She stiffened. "Market research, industry standards." "Which industry? Because SaaS companies typically take 3 to 5 years to—" "Bridget," Mom's voice was sharp. "Not tonight. I'm just asking questions. Dad, you're putting in $500,000. Don't you want to see the client acquisition model, the burn rate? Who are these angel investors?" Meredith's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. "You wouldn't understand, Bridget. This is startup culture. It's not like your little accounting job." "My little accounting job involves analyzing exactly these kinds of—" "Enough." Dad stood up. "Bridget, this is your sister's moment. We didn't invite you here to interrogate her." "I'm not interrogating. I'm asking basic due diligence questions that any investor would—" "We're not any investors. We're family." Mom's hand found Meredith's shoulder. "We believe in her. Why can't you?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. I looked around the table, at my father's defensive posture, at my mother's protective grip on Meredith, at my sister's barely concealed smirk. "I believe in facts," I said quietly, "and these numbers don't add up." "You're jealous." Mom said it like a diagnosis. "You've always been jealous of Meredith. She has something you don't. Vision, charisma, the courage to dream big. And instead of supporting her, you're trying to tear her down." Meredith dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "I just wanted us to celebrate together, as a family." Dad put his arm around her. "We are celebrating. Bridget, apologize to your sister." I stood up from the table. "I hope I'm wrong," I said. "I really do." But I wasn't wrong. And somewhere in my father's eyes, just for a moment, I saw that he knew it too. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table until 3 a.m., writing an email I knew would probably go unread. But I had to try. I detailed everything: the unrealistic revenue projections, the vague references to angel investors with no names attached, the missing operational budget, the fact that Meredith had no technical background and hadn't mentioned a single developer on her team. I attached articles about startup failure rates. I included a spreadsheet showing what responsible early-stage funding actually looked like. I ended with, Please, just hire an independent auditor before you transfer the money. I'll pay for it myself. Give me 2 weeks to verify her claims. That's all I'm asking. I sent it to both my parents. 2 weeks passed. Nothing. I called Mom. Did you read my email? Bridget, it was very long. Did you read any of it? A sigh. Honey, your father and I appreciate your concern, but we've made our decision. The money transferred yesterday. My chest tightened. Yesterday? Meredith needed it for a time-sensitive opportunity. Some big client meeting. You know how business works. You have to move fast. No, I knew exactly how this worked. And this wasn't business. This was a disaster in slow motion. Mom, please, just promise me you'll keep records. Get everything in writing. If anything seems off. Good night, Bridget. The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to silence. Then I did something I'd never done before. I created a folder on my computer labeled Novatech. I saved the email there, not to say I told you so later, not to build a case. I saved it because I needed proof, for myself, that I had tried, that I wasn't crazy for seeing what I saw. 1 year later, I almost believed I'd been wrong. Mom's birthday party. Meredith pulled up in a gleaming white BMW, designer sunglasses perched on her head, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Company car, she announced to the gathering relatives, running her hand along the hood. Well, technically a lease, but Novatech covers it. Aunt Margaret nearly sprained something rushing over to congratulate her. Meredith, you're doing so well. Your parents must be so proud. We are, Dad said, puffing up like he'd invented the internet himself. I always knew she had it in her. I stood by the punch bowl, watching the performance. Because that's what it was. A performance. I'd worked with enough companies to recognize the signs. The car was leased, not owned. Meredith's assistant was actually a freelancer she'd hired for the day. The office space she'd shown in Instagram photos? A co-working space rented by the hour. But everyone was buying it. Hook, line, and sinker. Bridget! Aunt Margaret cornered me by the appetizers. Still doing taxes? Forensic accounting. That's nice. You should ask Meredith for some career advice. She really knows how to play the game. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. Later, I overheard Mom in the kitchen. Meredith needs another $50,000 just to bridge a cash flow gap, completely normal in startups. Another 50? That was Dad, sounding less certain than usual. Richard, don't you dare doubt her now. She's so close to making it big. I left the party early, claiming a headache. It wasn't entirely a lie. In the car, I added a new note to my Novatech folder. Additional investment, $50K. Source, parents' savings. 0 documentation requested. The dominoes were lining up. I just couldn't see how they'd fall. Meredith found me in the backyard, away from the party noise. Why do you always look like someone died? I turned. She was backlit by the string lights Mom had hung, champagne glass in hand, every inch the successful entrepreneur. Nice car, I said. What's the lease payment? Her smile flickered. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just curious about your burn rate. My what? How fast you're spending money versus making it. Basic startup metrics. I kept my voice neutral. You raised another $50,000 from Mom and Dad. That's $550 total. What's your monthly revenue? Meredith stepped closer. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Asking questions? Trying to sabotage me. Her whisper turned venomous. You've always been jealous, since we were kids. You couldn't stand that I was the pretty one, the talented one, the one everyone actually liked. I'm not jealous, Meredith. I'm concerned. About what? About where the money is actually going. For a split second, something shifted in her expression. Fear, real fear. Then it was gone. Then, stay out of my business, Bridget. She jabbed a finger at my chest. You have no idea what I'm capable of. That's what worries me. We stood there, sisters who'd never really been friends, the distance between us measured in more than feet. You know what your problem is? Meredith's voice dripped with disdain. You're small. You think small. You'll spend your whole life checking other people's work because you don't have the guts to create anything yourself. She drained her champagne and walked away. I watched her go, noting the slight tremor in her hands. Confident people don't tremble. Guilty people do. But I didn't have proof. Not yet. And in my family, suspicion meant nothing without an audience to witness the truth. Driving home that night, I made a decision. I pulled over on a quiet street, engine idling, and had an honest conversation with myself. What were my options? Keep pushing, keep warning, keep being dismissed as the jealous little sister? I'd sent the email. I'd asked the questions. I'd done everything short of hiring a private investigator, and even then, what crime could I prove? Bad business decisions aren't illegal. Lying to your parents about your success isn't fraud. The hard truth was, my parents were adults. They'd made their choice. And every time I tried to intervene, I became the villain in their story. I thought about what my grandfather used to say. Harold Whitney, Dad's father, the only person in my family who'd ever really seen me. Bridget, some lessons can't be taught. They have to be lived. Your job isn't to save people from themselves. Your job is to make sure you're not standing in the blast zone when they finally learn. He'd been dead 4 years now. I missed him every day. I picked up my phone and called my father. Bridget, it's late. I know. I just wanted to say, if Meredith needs more money, don't ask me. I won't be participating. Silence. I'm not saying this to be cruel, I continued. I love you. I love Mom, but I can't co-sign something I don't believe in. You never did have family spirit, his voice was ice. Family spirit isn't blind loyalty, Dad. It's honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Good night, Bridget. He hung up. I sat there in my car, in the dark, and let myself feel the full weight of it. I wasn't leaving my family. I was just refusing to drown with them. Sometimes that's the bravest thing you can do. The silence started slowly. First, I wasn't invited to Sunday dinners. Mom's tired, Dad texted. We're keeping it small. But Meredith's Instagram showed the whole family gathered around the dining table. Then the group text stopped including me. I'd see photos of family outings on Facebook, beach trips, restaurant dinners, a weekend at some fancy resort, all featuring everyone except me. 3 months in, I received my first communication from my mother in weeks. A Venmo request for $47.83. The memo? Instant pot I bought. You can pay me back whenever. No, how are you? No, we miss you. Just a payment request for a kitchen appliance. I sent the money without comment. The worst part wasn't being excluded, it was the erasure. My mother posted a photo captioned "My beautiful family" with Meredith front and center, Mom and Dad beaming beside her. I was nowhere, not mentioned, not missed. I found out about the resort trip from Aunt Margaret, of all people. She called to ask why I hadn't come. I wasn't invited. Oh. A long pause. Meredith said you were too busy with work. Did she? Honey, you know how families are. Everyone gets busy. I'm sure it wasn't intentional. But it was intentional. Every family gathering I missed, every photo I wasn't in, every conversation that happened without me, Meredith was rewriting history. And my parents were helping her do it. I stopped checking their social media. I stopped waiting for calls that never came. I focused on my work, my apartment, my small circle of actual friends who actually showed up. And I told myself I was fine. Mostly, I believed it. But late at night, sometimes I wondered, how do you mourn a family that's still alive but has already buried you? I have to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? Like you're standing right there but somehow invisible? If you have, tell me in the comments, what did you do? Did you keep trying, or did you step back like I did? And if this story is hitting close to home, hit that like button. Let me know I'm not alone in this. Okay, back to what happened next, because the silence was about to break in a way none of us expected. 2 years after the investment, I got an unexpected phone call. Miss Bridget Whitney, the voice was formal, elderly. This is Theodore Marsh, attorney. I represented your grandfather Harold's estate. I almost dropped my coffee. Mr. Marsh, that was years ago. Indeed, 4 years since Harold passed. I apologize for the delay in reaching out, but I was given specific instructions. Instructions? Your grandfather left certain documents with me, a supplementary provision to his will. He asked me to deliver it to you personally when, and I quote, "the time is right." I gripped the phone tighter. What does that mean? How would you know when the time is right? Honestly, Miss Whitney, I wasn't certain myself, but Harold was a wise man. He said, and forgive my bluntness, when things fall apart for Bridget's parents, she'll need to know she wasn't crazy, and she'll need something solid to stand on. My throat tightened. Even from beyond the grave, Grandpa Harold saw me. Are things falling apart, Miss Whitney? I thought about the empty seats at my graduation, the ignored email, the family trips without me, the $500,000 evaporating into my sister's fantasy. Not yet, I said, but I think they might be soon. Then I'll be in touch. Your grandfather had tremendous faith in you, you know. He told me once, Bridget's the only one in that family who can tell the difference between what's real and what's just shine. I couldn't speak for a moment. Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Don't thank me, thank Harold. He always knew what he was doing. After I hung up, I sat with my cold coffee and cried. Not from sadness, from the overwhelming relief of being seen by someone who wasn't even here anymore. A month later, I ran into Agent Carla Reyes at a financial crimes conference downtown. She recognized me before I recognized her. Bridget Whitney, Morrison and Hartley, right? I turned to find a sharp-featured woman in a navy blazer, FBI badge visible at her hip. It took me a moment to place her. Agent Reyes, the Thornton Securities case. You remember, she smiled. You basically handed us that conviction. Your analysis of the shell company transactions was textbook. I just followed the numbers. That's exactly why you're good at it. She tilted her head. Still doing forensic work? Every day. Good. We need more people who can actually read a balance sheet. She reached into her pocket and handed me a business card. I'm heading up the white-collar crime unit now. If you ever see anything unusual in your work, give me a call. I looked at the card. Simple. Official. FBI seal in the corner. What kind of unusual? The kind that keeps you up at night. Her gaze was knowing. I've been doing this job for 15 years. You learn to recognize when someone's carrying something heavy, and you look like you're carrying something. I almost told her. Right there, in that conference hall with 300 people milling around. I almost said, my sister's running a scam and my parents gave her $500,000 and nobody will listen to me. But I didn't. Just work stress, I said. Sure. She didn't push. But if that stress ever has a name and a dollar amount, you know where to find me. I slipped the card into my wallet behind my driver's license. I told myself I'd never use it. Funny how the things we tell ourselves are rarely true. 3 years after my parents wrote that check, my phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. Bridget? Mom's voice was bright. Too bright. I'm calling about Thanksgiving. I almost didn't answer. Our last conversation had been 4 months ago, and only because I'd texted her happy birthday. What about it? We're hosting this year. Big gathering. 30 people. Family, friends, the Hendersons from next door. Meredith has a special announcement, and we want everyone there. Another announcement. Another chance for Meredith to shine while I stood in the shadows. I don't know, Mom. Work's been... Bridget. Her voice hardened. You will be there. This is important to your sister. To all of us. Whatever issues we've had, we're still family. Still, I wanted to laugh. Family. The word meant something very different to me than it did to her. What time? 4 o'clock. Wear something nice. And Bridget? She paused. Try to be supportive this time. No negativity. No negativity. As if asking questions about where $500,000 went was negativity. I'll be there, I said. After I hung up, I sat at my desk and stared at nothing. 3 years. In that time, I'd been promoted twice, bought my own condo, built a life entirely separate from the family that didn't want me. I'd learned to stop checking Meredith's social media, to stop wondering what they were saying about me at dinners I wasn't invited to, but some part of me, the little girl who'd searched for her parents' faces in a graduation crowd, that part still hoped. Maybe things had changed. Maybe this invitation meant something. I picked out a nice dress, navy blue, conservative, professional. I had no idea I was dressing for a funeral. I arrived 15 minutes early. My first mistake. Oh good, you're here. Mom thrust an apron at me before I could even take off my coat. Help me with the appetizers, and the drink station needs setting up. I looked down at the apron. It had cartoon turkeys on it and said, "Gobble till you wobble." Where's Meredith? Resting upstairs. She's been working so hard on her presentation. We need to let her conserve her energy. Of course. I spent the next hour arranging cheese platters, filling ice buckets, and greeting guests at the door like hired help. Aunt Margaret, Uncle Thomas, 3 sets of cousins I barely recognized. The Hendersons, who'd watched me grow up and now looked at me like they couldn't quite remember my name. By the time Meredith made her entrance, the living room was packed. She descended the staircase like a movie star, red dress, professional makeup, heels that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Everyone turned. Everyone applauded. My mother actually wiped away a tear. "Doesn't she look wonderful?" Mom whispered to Mrs. Henderson. "That's my entrepreneur." I stood by the punch bowl in my navy dress and turkey apron, pitcher of lemonade in hand. Aunt Margaret sidled up to me. "Bridget, still doing… what is it you do?" "Forensic accounting." Right, numbers." She waved dismissively. "You know, you could learn a thing or two from your sister. She's got that spark, that ambition." Across the room, Meredith caught my eye. She raised her champagne glass in my direction with a smile that said exactly what she thought of me. I smiled back. And I made myself a silent promise. Whatever happened tonight, this was the last time I would stand in this room feeling small. Dad called for everyone's attention just before we sat down to eat. "Before we say grace," he announced, standing at the head of the table, "I want to raise a toast. To family, to success, and to my daughter Meredith, who's proven that the Whitneys know how to dream big." Applause rippled through the room. 30 people, champagne glasses raised. 3 years ago, Patricia and I made the best investment of our lives. $500,000 in Novatech Solutions. He beamed at Meredith. And I am proud to say, it's paying off beyond our wildest dreams. I stood frozen by the sideboard, still holding the gravy boat. Now I don't want to leave out our other daughter. Dad turned to me, and the warmth drained from his voice. "Bridget, we hope that someday you'll learn from your sister. Maybe take some notes, figure out how to stop working for other people and actually build something of your own." Laughter. 30 people, laughing. "After all," Dad continued, encouraged by the response, "someone has to be the worker bee while the rest of us think big. Right, Bridget?" More laughter. Uncle Thomas slapped his knee. Aunt Margaret covered her smile with her napkin. Mom chimed in. "Don't worry, honey. Being an employee is respectable too. Not everyone can be a leader." I counted the faces. 30 people who'd just heard my father call me a failure. 30 people nodding along. 30 people who would remember this moment at every future gathering. I set down the gravy boat. I did not cry. I was long past tears. But I made sure to memorize every face, every smirk, every person who laughed at my expense. Because somewhere, deep in my bones, I knew. This story wasn't over yet. The doorbell rang. Mom frowned at the interruption. Who could that be? Everyone's already here. She handed her napkin to Dad and walked to the front door. I watched from my spot by the wall, still holding a serving spoon, still wearing that ridiculous apron. The door opened. Two people in dark suits stood on the porch. The woman in front held up a badge. Mrs. Whitney, I'm Special Agent Carla Reyes, FBI. This is Agent Morrison. May we come in? The living room went silent. 30 people turned toward the foyer like a single organism. FBI? Mom's voice cracked. There must be some mistake. No mistake. Carla stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on my sister. We're looking for Meredith Whitney. The color drained from Meredith's face. She stood frozen in her red dress, champagne glass still in hand. What is this about? Dad strode forward. This is a private family gathering. Meredith Whitney. Carla's voice cut through his bluster. You're under arrest for securities fraud and wire fraud in connection with Novatech Solutions. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Agent Morrison moved toward Meredith with handcuffs. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers. Someone dropped a wine glass, and through all of it, Carla's eyes found mine across the room. She gave me the smallest nod. Not of conspiracy. I hadn't called her, hadn't reported anything, just recognition. One professional acknowledging another. I stood very still, turkey apron and all, and watched my family's carefully constructed world begin to crumble. Meredith screamed. It wasn't a sound I'd ever heard her make before. Raw, primal. The scream of someone who'd just realized there was nowhere left to run. No! Meredith thrashed as Agent Morrison secured the handcuffs. You can't do this. I haven't done anything wrong. Ma'am, please calm down. This was Dad's idea. The room went absolutely still. Dad's face turned gray. Daddy told me to do it. Meredith was sobbing now, mascara streaming down her face. He said if we faked the investor reports, we could get more funding. He said no one would ever check. He helped me write the fake financials. Meredith, Dad's voice was barely a whisper. Stop talking. You promised you'd protect me. She lunged toward him, handcuffs clinking. You said it was just creative accounting. You said everyone does it. Mom grabbed the back of a chair, swaying. Richard, what is she saying? Patricia, I can explain. You knew? Mom's voice rose to a shriek. You knew and you didn't tell me? It wasn't supposed to. The investors were never supposed to find out. Mom collapsed. 3 people rushed to catch her. Mrs. Henderson screamed for water. Uncle Thomas pulled out his phone to call 911. In the chaos, Carla continued reading Meredith her rights, her voice steady and professional against the backdrop of family implosion. I didn't move. I watched my father try to revive my mother. I watched my sister being led toward the door, still screaming accusations. I watched 30 people witness the destruction of everything my parents had built their identities around. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a hollow emptiness where anger used to be. This wasn't victory. This was watching a house fire from the lawn, knowing you'd tried to warn them about the faulty wiring, knowing they'd called you crazy for smelling smoke. The EMTs cleared Mom. Just a fainting spell, no lasting damage. She sat on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders, looking 20 years older than she had an hour ago. Agent Carla pulled me aside near the front door, away from the others. I want to make something clear, she said quietly. You didn't cause this. I know. The investigation came from external investors. They hired independent auditors 6 months ago after inconsistencies in their quarterly reports. Your sister was siphoning money, nearly $2.3 million from multiple investors. Your parents' $500,000 was just the beginning. $2.3 million. My stomach turned. Your father's involvement. Carla hesitated. We'll be looking into that. But Bridget, the point I want to make is that you had nothing to do with this bust. I recognized you from the conference. But that's coincidental. People will think I reported her. Let them think what they want. You know the truth. She glanced back at the shell-shocked guests. For what it's worth, if they'd listened to you 3 years ago, this might have stopped at $500,000 in family losses instead of federal charges and prison time. She handed me a card, not her FBI card, but a victim services number. Your parents may need this. They're likely going to lose everything in civil suits. I took the card numbly. Before she left, Carla turned back. Your grandfather, Harold Whitney. He was mentioned in some of our background research. A straight arrow from what we found. He would have been proud of you. Then she was gone. And I was left standing in my parents' foyer, holding a victim services card, wearing a turkey apron, listening to my mother sob in the next room. This was what truth looked like. It wasn't pretty. The guests fled like the house was on fire. Aunt Margaret didn't even say goodbye. The Hendersons practically ran to their car. Within 30 minutes, the living room that had held 30 people was empty except for family. Dad found me in the kitchen, where I'd retreated to take off that ridiculous apron. Bridget, his voice was hoarse, I need your help. I folded the apron carefully, set it on the counter. You're good with finances. You could testify. Tell them I didn't know what Meredith was doing. Tell them I'm just a retiree who trusted his daughter. I looked at my father, really looked at him. The man who'd called me a worker bee, who'd made 30 people laugh at my expense, who'd ignored my warnings because they came from the wrong daughter. Dad, you knew. I didn't. You helped her write the reports. She said so. She's panicking. She doesn't know what she's saying. I have an email. The words came out flat. 3 years ago, I sent you and Mom a detailed analysis of everything wrong with Novatech's financials. You read it. His face went pale. That doesn't prove. I'm not going to testify against you. I picked up my purse. But I'm not going to lie for you either. This is your family. Yes. I met his eyes. And families don't ask each other to commit perjury. Bridget, please. You taught me to be honest, Dad. Remember? When I was 8 and I lied about breaking the vase? You grounded me for a month because Whitney's tell the truth. He had no answer for that. Whitney's tell the truth, I repeated. Or at least, one of them does. I walked past him through the living room where my mother sat crying and out the front door. I didn't look back. I was almost to my car when I heard footsteps behind me. Bridget, wait! Aunt Margaret stood on the driveway, arms wrapped around herself against the November cold. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. I wanted to say, she faltered, I'm sorry. I stopped, keys in hand. For what exactly? For everything. For not seeing. She took a shaky breath. For laughing when when he said those things about you. You did more than laugh, Aunt Margaret. You told me to learn from Meredith, multiple times, over multiple years. I know. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was wrong. We all were. I studied her face, searching for sincerity. Finding it, but finding something else too. The kind of regret that only comes when consequences finally arrive. You didn't apologize because you realized you were wrong, I said slowly. You apologized because you finally saw that Meredith wasn't who you thought she was. She flinched. Bridget, that's not... It's okay. I unlocked my car. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because I spent years trying to make people see what was right in front of them, and no one listened. So forgive me if I don't jump up and down because you're sorry now that the FBI showed up. What can I do? To make it right? I thought about it. Next time someone in this family is being dismissed, overlooked, laughed at, speak up before the disaster, not after. I got in my car. Bridget, Margaret called as I started the engine. For what it's worth, your grandfather always said you were the one who'd land on your feet. I pulled out of the driveway without responding. But I held those words with me, all the way home. Grandpa Harold, still looking out for me. Let me pause here for a second. If Aunt Margaret came to you with that apology, would you forgive her? Or would you feel like it was too little too late? I genuinely want to know. Drop your answer in the comments. And while you're thinking about it, if this story is making you feel something, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Now let me tell you what happened in the weeks that followed. 3 days after Thanksgiving, Theodore Marsh called again. Miss Whitney, I believe the time has come. His office was exactly what you'd expect from a 70-year-old estate attorney: dark wood, leather chairs, walls lined with law books that probably hadn't been opened in decades. He gestured for me to sit. Your grandfather Harold came to me 4 years ago, shortly before he passed. Mr. Marsh opened a manila folder. He added a codicil to his will, a supplement kept separate and confidential. Why separate? Because he didn't want your father to know about it until after everything was settled. Mr. Marsh slid a document across the desk. Harold left you the lake house in Lake Geneva. I stared at the paper. Lake Geneva, Grandpa's cabin, where we'd spent summers fishing and reading and not talking about anything important, just being. I'd assumed it went to Dad with everything else. The property is valued at approximately $800,000, Mr. Marsh continued. It's been maintained by a property management company, paid through a separate trust Harold established. All yours, free and clear. My hands trembled as I picked up the document. There's a letter as well. Mr. Marsh handed me an envelope with my name in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. I opened it. Bridget, if you're reading this, things have probably fallen apart the way I always feared they would. I'm sorry I couldn't do more while I was alive. Your father is my son, but that doesn't make me blind to his faults. You were always the one who saw things clearly. This house is yours because you'll take care of it the way it deserves, the way I always knew you'd take care of yourself. I see you, sweetheart. I always did. Grandpa Harold. I cried in Theodore Marsh's office for 20 minutes. He handed me tissues and said nothing. Some silences are the kindest thing. Word travels fast in families, even broken ones. 2 weeks later, my mother called. Dad left you the lake house? No hello. No how are you. How could you not tell us? I just found out. That property should have gone to your father. It was Harold's. It belongs with the family. I am family, Mom. A pause, then. You need to sell it. The proceeds should be split. Meredith's legal fees. No. Bridget, you don't understand. Your sister is facing federal charges. Your father might be indicted. We've had to hire lawyers. The investors are filing civil suits. We could lose everything. And I'm sorry about that. Genuinely. But I'm not selling Grandpa's house to pay for consequences I warned you about 3 years ago. You're being selfish. I laughed. It came out bitter. Selfish. When you and Dad took your retirement money and gave it to Meredith without even asking my professional opinion, that wasn't selfish? That was an investment. That was favoritism, Mom, dressed up in business language. You bet everything on the wrong daughter, and now you want the right daughter to bail you out. Silence. I love you, I said, and meant it. But love doesn't mean I set myself on fire to keep you warm. Grandpa left me that house because he trusted me. I won't betray that trust. Your grandfather would be ashamed of you. No, my voice was steady. He's the only one who wouldn't be. I hung up. Then I blocked her number. Not forever, just until I could breathe again. I drove to Lake Geneva that weekend, walked through the empty house, touched the wooden beams Grandpa had installed himself, and I let myself feel, for the first time in years, like I belonged somewhere. I unblocked my mother after a week. Some conversations need to happen face to face. We met at a coffee shop. Neutral ground. Dad came too, looking 10 years older than he had at Thanksgiving. Mom's hands shook when she lifted her cup. Before you say anything, I started, I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to set boundaries. Boundaries. Dad said the word like it was foreign. Yes, here's where I stand. I pulled out a sheet of paper. I'd written it down because I knew I'd lose my nerve otherwise. I love you both. I'm not cutting you out of my life, but I will not provide any financial support for Meredith's legal defense or restitution payments. I will not testify to anything that isn't true, and I will not apologize for being the daughter who tried to warn you. Mom opened her mouth. I held up my hand. I'm not finished. If you want a relationship with me going forward, it has to be based on respect, not on what I can do for you, not on comparing me to Meredith, on actually seeing me as a person. We've always, Mom started. You haven't. And I've spent 32 years pretending that was okay. I folded the paper. It's not okay. It never was. Dad stared at his coffee. We really messed this up, didn't we? Yes. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was honesty. Maybe the first real honesty we'd ever had. I don't know how to fix this, Mom whispered. I don't either, I admitted. But we can't fix anything if we can't even admit it's broken. We sat there, three people who shared blood but had forgotten how to share anything else. It was a start. A painful, awkward, necessary start. 6 months after Thanksgiving, the legal hammer fell. Meredith pleaded guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of securities fraud. The judge showed no sympathy for her tears or her expensive lawyers. 5 years in federal prison, no parole. Dad was indicted as a co-conspirator. His case dragged on for months, but eventually he accepted a plea deal. 2 years suspended sentence, 3 years probation, and a lifetime ban from involvement in any investment activities. The civil suits were worse. The defrauded investors, 7 different parties, totaling $2.3 million in losses, filed a coordinated lawsuit. My parents' house went first, then the cars, then what little remained of their retirement accounts. By the time the settlements were finalized, they were left with nothing. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex that smelled like mildew and regret. I visited once. The apartment was small, cramped with furniture that didn't fit. Photos of Meredith were conspicuously absent from the walls. Social Security covers the rent, Dad said flatly. Barely. Mom sat in a corner chair staring at nothing. She'd stopped dyeing her hair. The gray made her look ancient. I'm not here to gloat, I said. Then why are you here? I set a bag of groceries on the counter. Basics, bread, milk, canned soup. Because you're still my parents. Dad looked at the groceries, then at me. Something shifted in his face. We don't deserve this. No, I agreed. You don't, but it's not about deserving. I left without hugging them. Not because I didn't want to, because I wasn't ready. And that was okay. Healing isn't linear. Forgiveness isn't instant. Sometimes love looks like groceries on a counter, and nothing else you're able to give. The social fallout was almost worse than the legal one. Within a month of the arrests, my parents' social circle evaporated. The couples they'd vacationed with, the church group Mom had led for 15 years, the country club Dad had been so proud of joining, all gone. Aunt Margaret kept me updated, though I hadn't asked her to. Your mother got dropped from the women's ministry, she told me over the phone. Someone made a comment about not wanting that kind of attention at their events. And Dad? His golf buddies stopped returning calls. The retirement party they were planning for Bill Henderson? Your father wasn't invited, after 20 years of friendship. I thought about that Thanksgiving room. 30 people laughing at me, 30 people toasting Meredith's success. Where are all those people now? Margaret was quiet for a moment. Nowhere. That's the thing about fair weather friends, Bridget. They're only there for the weather. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt tired. Your parents keep asking about you, Margaret added. Your mother especially. She mentions you every time we talk. What does she say? She says she wishes she'd listened. She says she looks at old photos and can't believe how blind she was. She says, what? She says she's proud of you, for turning out the way you did despite everything they got wrong. I didn't know what to do with that. The parents who'd laughed at me, who'd chosen Meredith at every turn, who'd called me selfish for not selling my inheritance, were they really capable of change? I didn't know. But I noticed something. They hadn't asked for money in months. They hadn't made demands. Maybe that was progress. Or maybe they'd just finally run out of things to take. While my family was falling apart, I was quietly putting myself together. The promotion came 6 months after Thanksgiving. Director of Forensic Accounting, corner office, team of 8 analysts reporting to me. A salary that made me blink when I saw the offer letter. My boss shook my hand at the announcement. "You've earned this, Bridget. We need more people with your integrity." Integrity. The thing my family had called stubbornness, jealousy, lack of team spirit. I started spending weekends at the lake house. I hired someone to update the plumbing, repaint the bedrooms, restore the dock where Grandpa and I used to fish. I created a reading nook in the corner with the best light and named it Harold's Corner. And I started therapy. It wasn't easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. But sitting in Dr. Patterson's office every Tuesday, unpacking decades of feeling invisible, learning to recognize my own worth, it changed something fundamental in me. "You spent 30 years seeking validation from people who weren't capable of giving it," Dr. Patterson said once. "That's not a character flaw. That's survival. But you're not just surviving anymore." She was right. I was building. In the spring, I met someone, James, a carpenter of all things. Grandpa would have loved the irony. He was quiet, steady, the kind of man who showed up when he said he would and meant what he said. Our third date, he asked why I seemed surprised that he called when he promised to. "I'm just not used to people keeping their word," I admitted. He reached across the table and took my hand. "Then let me get you used to it." No grand gestures, no dramatic promises, just presence, consistency, the things I'd been starving for my whole life. 1 year after Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed with a text from an unblocked number. "Mom, can you call me when you have a moment? I don't need anything, I just want to talk." I stared at that message for 2 hours before responding. The call was awkward. Long silences, false starts. But something was different. "I'm not calling to ask for money," Mom said first thing. "I want you to know that. Okay? I've been going to a therapist. Your father thinks it's a waste, but—" She laughed weakly. "I think I needed someone to help me see what I couldn't see on my own." "And what's that?" "How much I failed you." Her voice broke. "I've been going through old photos. Your graduation. I wasn't there, Bridget. My daughter's valedictorian speech, and I wasn't there because Meredith had an audition." "I remember." "How do you remember without hating me?" I thought about it. "I did hate you. For a while. But hate is heavy, Mom. I got tired of carrying it." She cried then. Not the theatrical crying I'd grown up with, but something raw and ugly and real. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Not because I want something from you. Because I owe you an apology I should have given years ago." I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. But I said, "Thank you for saying that. Can we try? To have something? I don't expect you to forget. I just want a chance to do better." I watched the sunset through my lake house window. The water was golden, peaceful. "We can try," I said, slowly. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even trust. But it was a door, left slightly open. That would have to be enough for now. 18 months after the arrest, I drove to Alderson Federal Prison Camp in West Virginia. I don't know what made me go. Curiosity, maybe. Or the need for closure that therapy kept telling me I deserved. Or maybe just the simple fact that, despite everything, Meredith was still my sister. The visiting room was fluorescent lit and depressing. Meredith shuffled in wearing khaki scrubs, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a limp ponytail. She looked nothing like the woman in the red dress who'd descended my parents' staircase. "Why are you here?" No preamble. Same old Meredith. "I don't know." I admitted. I just needed to see you. She sat across from me, hands flat on the table. Come to gloat? No. Liar. Meredith, if I wanted to gloat, I'd have come 18 months ago. I'm here because I have a question. She raised an eyebrow. Was it really Dad's idea? Or did you just say that because you were scared? For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then slowly, the mask cracked. Both. Her voice was barely a whisper. He encouraged me. He helped with the reports. But I made the choice. I signed the documents. I took the money. She looked at her hands. I'm not a victim, Bridget. I'm just a person who got caught. That's the first honest thing you've ever said to me. She laughed bitterly. Prison gives you a lot of time to think. What do you think about? How I ended up here. How I spent my whole life performing and never actually being anything real. She met my eyes. How you were always the one who was actually okay. We sat in silence, not sisters exactly, but maybe, finally, something like honest. Summer now. I'm sitting on the dock at Lake Geneva, bare feet dangling over water that sparkles like Grandpa's eyes used to when he told his terrible jokes. James is inside, probably making that coffee he's so proud of, the kind that takes 20 minutes and tastes exactly like the instant kind, but I'd never tell him that. I've been thinking about what this whole experience taught me. First, your worth isn't determined by people who refuse to see it. I spent 30 years performing for an audience that was looking at someone else. That wasn't a reflection of my value, it was a reflection of their blindness. Second, setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary. I used to think love meant tolerating everything, absorbing every hurt, being the bigger person until I disappeared entirely. Now I know that real love, including self-love, requires limits. Third, sometimes the best thing you can do is step back and let consequences happen. I didn't take revenge on my family. I didn't call the FBI. I didn't orchestrate their downfall. I just refused to participate in their delusion, and eventually, reality caught up. Grandpa understood this. That's why he left me the house. Not as a weapon against Dad, but as solid ground for me to stand on when everything else washed away. I still see my parents occasionally. Mom more than Dad. It's fragile, what we're building. More like acquaintances who share a history than a mother and daughter who share a bond. But it's honest, which is more than we ever had before. And Meredith? She'll be out in 2 more years. I don't know what our relationship will look like then. Maybe nothing. Maybe something. The point is, I don't need to know. I don't need them to make me whole. I already am. My story doesn't have a fairy tale ending. There's no scene where my parents fall to their knees and beg forgiveness while violins play. No moment where Meredith and I embrace and promise to be best friends forever. No perfect family photo where everyone's smiling and the past is magically erased. Real life doesn't work that way. But here's what I do have. I have a career I'm proud of, built on skills that people used to mock. I have a house filled with memories of the one person who always saw me clearly. I have a partner who keeps his promises and doesn't understand why that's remarkable. I have peace. My boundaries look like this now. I love my family from a distance. I show up when I can, help when it doesn't harm me, and protect my peace above all else. I don't hate them. Hate takes too much energy. But I also don't pretend anymore that their approval means anything. The people who laughed at me that Thanksgiving, they've mostly faded away. Some have reached out with awkward apologies. I accept the apologies and decline the dinner invitations. If you're watching this and seeing yourself in any part of my story, the overlooked sibling, the dismissed expert, the family scapegoat, the person screaming truth into a void of deaf ears, I want you to know something. You are not crazy. You are not jealous. You are not too sensitive. You are seeing clearly in a room full of people who've chosen blindness. And eventually, the light catches up. So that's my story. Thank you for listening to all of it. Now I want to hear yours. Drop a comment below. Tell me about a time when you finally stopped shrinking and started standing tall. I'll read every single one. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel seen, or angry, or hopeful, please hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps more than you know. And turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. There are more just like this one in the description below. Stories about family, boundaries, and finding your worth. Until next time, protect your peace. You've earned it. See you in the next one.